We made it. Happy New Year, everybody. It's January 13th, and we are back. I'm Chris Gomez with my co-hosts, Rich Ross and Andy Schwam. Good to see you guys. How's it going? I didn't ask who, so now they can compete over who answers. Good to see you guys. How's it going? Look at that.
I'm waiting.
We'll both
be so courteous. That was so courteous. That was cool. How about Andy? How's it going, Andy?
It is going. It's going pretty well. We had a nice break, from the show for a couple of weeks for the holidays, and we're kind of ramping up in 2021. I don't know. I'm excited for the new year. I'm excited to get back to this show and chatting with all the people that tune in live. I know we all really enjoy that. And talking with you guys about technology. This is part of the show, kind of helps me, it motivates me on the technology side of things, just the way we have these conversations. So I like it.
Cool. That's awesome. And how's it going, Rich?
Good, Chris and Andy. Let's see, just making sure I get the first time doing this in a while, first time actually being on the show in a while. I've missed the last few weeks, so good to be back and echoing Andy's sentiments. New year, good to be back doing some Dev Talk show and getting into all kinds of cool things at work. So I'm pretty psyched.
Yeah. And there's a lot going on, a lot to talk about, and it's, I think what's really neat about what we do is sometimes we explore something that's maybe new to us, and then sometimes we say, well, let's maybe go back to something a little more foundational, right? And because we've done some C# shows, and then another night we said, let's figure out how to build an Azure pipeline. And I remember that there were a couple of shows where we just sort of tried to figure that out. And so that's the fun part. We, the three of us, are in the we're all involved in the malvernphilly.net user group, which is having its first ever virtual code camp this weekend. So Philly Code Camp, there'd been 29 of them in person, and now the group is gonna because there weren't any in 2020. How can we pull it off virtual in 2021? So that should be fun.
Yeah, to be a little different. Yeah. I mean, we're usually when we do them on site, I'm usually in there and running around making sure AV is up and working and those kind of things. But it's nice doing this a little differently and kind of back and seeing how this all comes together. And it's a monumentous one, being the 30th code camp that Bill and his team over at Philly.net has run. And it might be, since we're talking about it, a good time to paste into the chat the link if you are interested in copy this over and paste it in real quick. But if you're interested in seeing what sessions are there, or registering, or just being able to follow along remotely, this is how you can get the information about that. So, and there's also a Meetup too. I'll find that and throw that in there as well.
Yeah. So on my screen, I'm sharing the Meetup site right now. Philly.net is on Meetup. It's actually meetup.com/Philly-net. However, I think if you go there and just search for Philly.net, you're going to find it. Now, this code camp is being held over a Teams tenant that's designed for multi-channel, multi-session, kind of like a breakout day. So you do, besides, I do think if you want to go to this, you need to come to the site and click on something like the day one event, because they need you to you need to basically supply your email address, right? So they can get you into the Teams tenant. And that's the trick. Is there's a I thought there would be an email address here. Unfortunately I don't know. I thought there'd be an email address you could email, because you have to be added to the Teams tenant.
I think Bill will work all that stuff out, right? That's not really
I think
this is the website he wanted us to promote is the Sessionize site.
Oh yeah, the Sessionize site, which also unfortunately doesn't tell you, but if you do want to see the schedule, there are some interesting speakers. I wanted to point one out in particular, and just happened to pop up in the left here. That's not planned, by the way. I think the Sessionize site randomizes this each time.
Mm-hmm.
But Richard Campbell if you've been listening to .NET Rocks, he's been working on a history of .NET book for a little while, and to hear that he's going to present a session Friday at 9 a.m. the history of .NET. I mean, can I not see that one? So just among the many great speakers, here's Jeff Fritz, here's Kevin Griffin, Sam Basu, like Jeff. I mean, the list is pretty incredible. So,
And I think that list includes Chris Gomez and Andy Schwamm as well.
Yeah.
And
so
Rich, are you doing a talk?
I am not this year. I'm taking a bit
they
of a
let
break
anybody
from
in here, right?
Yeah.
But then we do have incredible speakers like Sarah Patrick, we've interviewed Sarah, like she taught us about, at the time, I think that they brought this, I could be wrong, but I think they brought a lot of the pieces she talked to us about into that Power platform.
Yep.
But she talked to us about them when they were like more separate, like Flow and I don't know that it was called Power Apps yet, but well, that's a couple years ago now. So pretty cool. Yeah.
Chris, what are you going to be talking about?
So. Well, I can just click and look at it, right? So I'm going to talk about GitHub Code Spaces, which is an upcoming feature of GitHub. Some people who've watched this show may have seen us talk about Visual Studio Code Spaces, because when Visual Studio Code Spaces was first announced, I was a big fan, and I immediately wanted to check it out. And but since then, since the original introduction, it has now been shifted over to GitHub, and GitHub is going to release the product. And like the highlight of it is that you can bring up a VS Code instance in your browser and work on code in your GitHub repo in a browser. You don't even have to have tools installed, right? So that's the thing that I think is pretty cool. And we got a lot of great folks showing up in YouTube, which really appreciate. If you're watching us, whether you're watching us on Twitch or YouTube, thanks for being here tonight. And love seeing the New Year's greetings.
Yeah, look who we got. I mean, Tim Farrow, old friend. Haven't seen him in a while. He's here. We got new people like Vincent Kendrick, who's new. We've got Shamali, who's new, I think new. And Contrived X is here. Bruno's here. We got, it's a fun night, right? Hopefully everyone that's there will join in as part of this discussion, right? And share their thoughts. Because if you're new to the show, that's one of the things that I think makes this show a little bit different is, this is a conversation. It's not just a conversation between the three of us. It's a conversation between all of us, right? And we really like to hear from everybody here, and and join in and help us, right? Because we don't always know everything. We don't usually know
always,
ever. Do we ever know everything?
Not ever.
Sometimes
Some may
Rich
say
does.
we don't know anything.
Yeah. Hey, do I get to plug my talk?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Let me bring it up. Yeah. So
Well,
besides talking about Code Spaces, I'm also gonna, since Code Spaces isn't available today, you can get a very Code Spaces-like experience with Docker, and we're gonna talk about a little bit about how to do that. But here's Andy Schwamm, and this looks familiar. Solid Principles of Software Design.
Yeah. We've talked about it here on the show. We did a 4-part series. Technically, it's a 5-part series, but we combined 2 together, if you remember. We did a 5-part series. And so we went into a lot of detail on each of the solid principles, which, by the way, if you're not familiar with them, they're design principles that apply to really software languages in general, right? They're about software design. They're especially good for object-oriented design. And they make your code, I think, cleaner and more maintainable and more manageable and things like that. And so this will be a pretty quick talk in 55 minutes going through 5 principles. I can even do the math on that. I mean, so I have a 5-minute intro and then 10 minutes on each of the solid principles. I'll be flying along, but it should be fun. And I am at a Saturday morning at 9 a.m.
Right.
If you want to join me, would love to have you.
That's U.S. Eastern time. Yep.
Eastern time. Thank you. Yeah. Tandy Santaro on YouTube is saying, will those sessions be recorded and uploaded to YouTube? And I think the answer is yes.
Yes. So Philly.net has a YouTube channel, which I will bring up. I'm showing you the Dev Talk Show channel now, but Philly.net has a YouTube channel that you can, I know this link is terrible, but you can reach it at youtube.com/PhillyDotNet, because you can't, you can't put a dot in your YouTube channel name. So it's very common for us to go around spelling Philly.net this way. If you do, I do encourage you to subscribe to the Philly.net channel twice a month. There are, using Teams now, we do have, when I say we, I mean, I do speak there sometimes, but Bill Wolf is the president, and Rob Kaiser helps him. And Rob Kaiser, I think, the two of them, right, founded it. They're still doing hands-on labs and meetings, and they are being recorded and uploaded. Now, you're right, Andy. The plan is to record these using, and then we are going to, and I've been enlisted to help. We're going to put the time in to get them out of Teams and get them onto YouTube. So it will be a process. It's an all-volunteer effort, and we are going to do the best we can. So the intent is that they're all there. I hope, knock on wood, no technical difficulties for something we're trying for the first time on this Teams tenant that Bill has graciously been allowed to use from Microsoft. That's the plan.
So I think it's safe to say they won't be up on YouTube Saturday.
Yeah.
Friday sessions won't be up Friday afternoon or anything like that. But in time, they should be there. And
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I was going to bring up our channel. So if you're watching us on YouTube and you hit that subscribe button, and if you're not watching us on YouTube, youtube.com/thedevtalkshow, hit that subscribe button and look through the old videos, and you will see Andy's series on solid principles as it was sprinkled in among some of the other talks. So,
today I was on the site and I was thinking about building a playlist for that.
Yeah, for the
Probably
solid
a good
series.
idea.
Yeah, makes
to
sense.
do something like that. But yeah, we've got a lot of good content on the YouTube channel, and I think it's really growing. I think we've got a nice channel there with a good variety of topics and talks. And if you're new to the show, we do a variety of different things, right? Anything that's interesting for developers is interesting for us.
Yeah. So the topic tonight, it's more open-ended than hopefully anybody realizes. It's just, let's talk about web APIs. And I decided, if I want some kind of definition, maybe we can go to Wikipedia. That's where you go, right? So, I mean, where else?
My kids will laugh if you say that. Even my kids laugh. They're like, you can't guarantee that that's accurate,
Well, what do you think of it? A web API is an application programming interface for either a web server or a web browser.
Yep.
It is a web development concept usually limited to a web application's client side. It's an interesting way of putting that, including any web frameworks being used, and thus does not include web server or browser implementation details unless publicly accessible by a remote application. I kind of feel like it went a little sideways from what I was thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking more of like using the web protocols that kind of we started out to build web pages to do communication with a server that isn't necessarily UI. That was kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah,
what do you guys think?
It gets a little confusing when they say usually limited to a web application's client side. I think that's pretty short-sighted. It is often used for a web application, like so if you have a SPA type client, web client, like let's say you have an Angular front end or some other front end, you might use a web API to send content, data back and forth to that UI. And that sort of fits in with this, I think, what they mean by a web application's client side. However, many APIs, and I think the core, beginning of them was when there is no UI at all, right? Just a way to get data access over the web almost, right?
Yeah.
Like getting data, saving data, no UI required.
Yeah, let's take a look at what this one says here. You know what I think is funny in the second paragraph, they say, as per Wikipedia's definition, but I kind of like how they break it down. Web API, as the name suggests, is an API over the web which can be accessed using HTTP protocol.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, and that's what Mike Shea says in the chat too. He thinks of it as HTTP/HTTPS, of course. And I do think that that is part of it, right? Because if once you leave HTTP, well, so here's the thing, right? We can talk about different platforms or whatever, different techniques for data on the web. And if you go back to something like WCF, which was capable of using non-HTTP protocols, right? And we would often say, though, oh, we're building a web. And this is where it gets tricky, I think, because we say, oh, I'm building a web API in WCF or something like that. And was it a web API? I think it was, but it may or it may not have been in those days on HTTP. And I think this is a sort of a modern. What do you think? I mean, am I being too hard on it there, or is this just a modern version of what API means on the web?
I think when it became so, you probably remember, those of us who remember the beginning of .NET, along with bringing .NET, to the Microsoft platform, like kind of, hello everybody, we're gonna have this new language and this new platform. And like a lot came in that bouquet, a lot. XML Web Services came with that, and those were on top of SOAP. Eventually, the need evolved to create WCF, right? But at that time, the world, I think it's kind of fair to say, hadn't discovered the idea of why don't we just keep using the web HTTP protocol for maybe talking to a server, whatever. I really feel at that point in time, we were still building websites. Like, remember this architecture? We were still building websites that talked to a business layer that then talked to a database layer, and it was all still in the walls of your data center.
Yeah, that's true.
And so the need hadn't, like, it was coming. We were right on the doorstep, but the need hadn't quite evolved to invent something that went across the wire. And that's what XML Web Services was like, now we can go across the wire. And more of us than not hated it because, SOAP stinks, whatever, blah. It was things like Ajax, which really was supposed to be asynchronous JavaScript and XML. But as Doug Crockford famously says, the X is silent for JavaScript, is silent and stands for JavaScript. That's when, like, there was a sea change where, hey, let's just go get some JSON from an endpoint. And now it's like common. Now we just do it. We're like, yeah, sure. That's web API. Yep.
Yeah.
Kind of second nature almost. That's kind of how you do that communication at this point.
Yeah. And I want to make it clear that just because this tutorials teacher site, like, they jump in and say, like, well, here's a framework. I'm not talking about any particular framework like that. That's not important to me. I happened to pick this because as I was looking for definitions, I liked that sentence. I said, yeah, there it is. It's not about the technology. It's about, do you remember when you'd have to get together the firewall team, the network team, developers, and a bunch of maybe even sometimes executives from all the different companies so that you could get your TCP ports open correctly and fill out some forms, probably 24-hour waiting time and stuff like that. And then we as developers said, wait a second, everybody's leaving port 80 open. What if we just did everything over that? We could have a lot shorter of a meeting.
Yeah.
And I really think that's why we're at. So
yeah, I think you're probably right to some degree. But yeah, right. That's funny.
So yeah, we'll agree that a web API is when we basically choose to reach an endpoint using GET, POST, just the way a browser does when it comes to our websites.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's the definition that today regardless of what it might have been at one point, that is the common practice. Now, you could take that further, and I think we've talked about this in another show where you get into the word rest and restful, and what does all that mean? But really, none of that is critical to the definition of a web API. Doesn't have to be rest or restful, right?
Right. Yep. I mean, your endpoints can be very, I think it was in the chat, they could be very RPC-like. They can, and that just stands for remote procedure call. So calling this endpoint that maybe even is like create user, it's not like where if you're thinking resource-based, you would hit a user endpoint with a post and then supply the data for that new user. And because you're posting, that must mean you're creating, right? Well, actually, that may not be true. That's where the arguments begin. So, yeah. So there is a lot to this because we've probably been doing this. I'm gonna guess. Do you think it's been 10 years or more that REST APIs kind of like that was it? If you were going to communicate with another company, it's probably been about 10 years. We stopped having to wonder how you were gonna talk to a third party.
I don't. I would like to say that I agreed with you. I would certainly say that there's a default right now, and that default is this RESTful type of web API, over port 80 and that kind of thing, HTTP. But it's not always. And, we have, at work, there are, clients that want data still in different ways. It's not always, I wish I could say that everybody was on board. But I think, it's headed that direction. It's definitely headed that direction. By the time we get full adoption, something new will come out, and then that will screw that up.
Yeah.
So we want to talk about what, ideas for designing? Do we want to talk about technologies? Where do you want to go with this?
Well, I feel like there's a process to deciding what you want to do for a particular API. I mean, what if you are given the task, I think a lot of times as developers, it's super easy for us to jump to what we're going to do. The core task might be, hey, our company needs a way to for other customers to read our catalog. I don't know what you might be. Maybe, I guess we'll pick on a service. We happen to be on YouTube, so we can pick on YouTube. I mean, I would just, I think without even thinking, if there was a new service I was interested in, I would expect that I'd find some kind of web API that I could call to interact with it. And YouTube's the same way. I can call in and say well, show me the videos from my channel. At least give me the list of videos from my channel, and then I could go maybe integrate them into my website or something. And as developers, how many times do we just jump to, well, hey, we need a web API for this? And so we've already chosen the technology, the protocol. That's a mouthful.
Yeah. Sorry, I got a little distracted on the chat. I'll be honest. I got a little distracted by
I took care
What's
of it.
that? Yeah, I saw you did. I was trying to figure out how, because I don't know how to do it. Oh, well, I got to learn. But anyway, yeah, so I apologize for sort of drifting for a sec. As I'm sure you were saying something,
Well, I mean, a lot of times as developers, if the conversation around the meeting table is, okay, everybody, we're here to discuss about a web API we have to build. That's a mouthful already. You've already chosen the protocol. You've already chosen how people are going to interact. But then again, probably not a horrible, if I sign up for a new service, you kind of expect that you're going to see some way to interact with it with some kind of web API. You expect it. You might even complain, so. Where's the web API so that I can automate this?
I've been doing it more and more these days. As a matter of fact, I'm a Lego geek, right? And I work with certain, websites for buying Lego pieces, specific pieces that I want to get. And, immediately the first thing I do is like, let's see if there's an API that I can like tap into, right? And make it easier for me. But I think it's important to have, we go into that meeting and you say, well, we're going to build a web API. And like you said, in just that statement, we've made certain decisions. But listen, what do I talk about a lot, and we've talked about it on the show, is having some standards, right? And it's important to have some standards, have some go-to things. Otherwise, every conversation ends up being a very long process. It doesn't mean we've ruled out something else, but we'll say, well, we're going to build a web API, And in that part of the conversation, we might get started, and somebody might say, hey, I've got another idea. Well, we're willing to entertain those other ideas, right? But we need to have a starting point. And I think that is the starting point these days is let's build a web API.
Yeah. So, I don't know if this will be interesting, but I thought, what do you two think about fleshing out what a web API that I might build would look like?
I don't know. We could share your screen. We could bring your screen up. I think we should. I think we should do that. I mean, I think it'll be a good idea. By the way, Meg's here and she's picking on me. She's making fun of me because Santa didn't bring me a razor for Christmas, is what she's saying. No, I got coal in my stocking actually. Yeah, this has got about a week of life left before the beard goes. I've been kindly asked by the management at my home office.
All right. So yeah, and maybe before we jump into it too much, like Mike Shea had added, I think the advantage of using a web API is being able to easily sit in front of an API gateway, right?
That helps.
And there's tools, there's API gateway, there's Azure API management that's starting to take away some of the like, okay, we got to set up servers and we got to put them in the data center. So maybe we are getting better there, right? So
yeah, Mike's in there talking about routes and configuring and stuff like that. And I think this is a good part of the conversation to maybe come back to. Like, I don't know if we're a little early to go there.
Yeah, I think we'll come back. I'm going to keep this one in the queue.
Yeah,
because it's the evolution of where at the beginning, you had to do it all, and we're hopefully a little bit better now. And actually, there's another one I'm going to hang on to because I think that's important too. So, I'm the treasurer for a homeowners association, and it's really not that complicated. There's a PO box, and people send checks to it, and then I get them. And I basically, they get cashed and they get put on the bank account. And so I'm not only keeping the bank book, which, is easier than ever because you can reconcile so much quicker just by checking the website, right? But there's also this idea that there's 34 residences. And I've learned over the several years that to think about that a certain way. At first, I just took everybody's checks and then I'd be like, oh, it looks like, and I'll use, pretend house numbers. It looks like 207 is behind. They're $50 behind. And then it might be that they're more behind. And then I actually came to the realization, wow, I need to make sure I really have a good way of keeping track of this and being able to prove later that I didn't just mess up this number. That I forgot to credit you or whatever. Because that could happen. I could be challenged. I could say, like, I know I sent you a check for $100. And I said, no, I don't have it here. The last check I have from you is this particular check number. I didn't have those thoughts at the beginning. And so I've solved the problem mostly with some homegrown stuff. And this might make some people in the chat laugh with Excel. And it's working very well. But it made me think a little bit about what if I just started designing endpoints. Like, for example, to me, and to me, each of those 34 homes is the account. Like, and so if I were to start designing an API, I might want to keep track of things like the house number and then maybe contact information for the homeowner. Why do I want that? Well, because in some future, I might build something that calls the API and prints, crafts the assessments for me, quote unquote, the bill. I'm doing some stuff with like mail merge and things like that now, right? And so I said, okay, well, if I was going to design an endpoint, like, would the first thing I do is expect that I'm going to have like a residence? Is it going to be slash residence?
I don't think anyone is seeing your screen.
Yeah, do you want to bring that up, or is that for your notes?
Yeah, let's bring the screen back up.
Okay.
I just started typing, so nobody really mentioned
anything.
No
problem.
Yep. So is that one of the first things I want to do? Because I already ruled out the idea of saying that there's a homeowner. So you have some API, right? HTTPS something dot, and then you start, here it is, something.com, and then you're going to start having endpoints. I ruled out a long time ago.
Let me jump in real quick before you.
I actually want you to jump in and tell me how should I really start thinking about this?
Well, I can play devil's advocate because this is probably what I would do, right? Mm-hmm. But if I was new to APIs, I would say to you, Chris, I don't understand. Why don't I just do something.com and then say like, get homeowners balance or something like that, like as one big word, right? Like, what is this homeowners thing? What is this resident? Why am I doing that? Yeah, something like that. I don't know the use case,
you're right. And then the next one would be like apply check, right?
Yeah, sure. That's right. That's what I was talking about. And again, I'm not saying this is the way to do it.
But let's talk about it. Why in your opinion is this maybe not the right way to do it?
So I think you could argue that it is the right way to do it, by the way, right? There is no one way to do things. Okay. I think that what we've found, I think the more people consume APIs, right? And there was a comment earlier where I'm just looking back in here where Vincent Kendrick said, where do you find great APIs, and talking about something called Rapid API, which is a place to just discover APIs, I believe. And the point is that the more you use these things, we look for commonalities between them, I think, right? We want them to make themselves, discoverable and navigatable and things like that. And I think, I'm guessing that the reason for this is because it was too hard to know what all these things were. I don't know. I'm supposing here.
Yeah.
But if I could have this place where I go /homeowners and I go, oh, okay, everything around this sort of homeowners object, this thing that I might want to work with, right, would be in a certain place. And so if I wanted to add a homeowner and remove a homeowner, like those kind of things, right? And Chris is typing here and putting in get and post and those kind of things. I guess my point is, I don't know if it's necessarily wrong to do those crazy methods like you have at the top. I just think it makes it harder to use and navigate, right? And consume an API that you're just hacking at, and you're like, hey, here's an API. I'll bet they have a get method on homeowner. Like it's just discoverable or something like that, right?
Well, I mean, so when let's go back to XML Web Services, because that was being brought to us from some enterprise groups, Oracle, Microsoft, IBM. And what did those methods look like? They looked kind of like the method names, because what they would tell us is, well, just write a class, and then the class is being exposed. And so the method names are whatever the method names were on the class. And I think early in HTTP API days, this is what we were doing until a very famous dissertation, Mr. Roy Fielding, right, and REST, influenced everyone. And I'm not here to try and say that the only thing to do is to follow this dissertation. Like, we're not here to fight that battle. But I do think, this was extremely influential, because it got people thinking about just what if you treated everything like resources constrain yourself to the protocol that you're working on, which happened to be the web. And so think about it like the web. If I want the information on a homeowner, I get it.
Yeah.
If I want to change it, I post it. And because previously it was a little bit of a Wild West. I mean, as if REST APIs are super standardized, right?
Right, but the fact is, functionally it could work with get homeowners
Yeah,
balance and
you could
apply
do
check.
it. You could do it, no doubt. So it shows a
I just
little
wanted
bit
to
of
sort of touch upon that as a concept that you started going into that whole like let's start with homeowners, and I don't know. I mean, I would be curious to know if there's anyone in the audience now, or any of us, Rich and you as well, that that would prefer to go back to an older style. I found that I've gotten used to it. The sort of new modern restful type of style, and I quite like it a bit. I can't say I'm an expert in all things in that way, but I don't miss apply check and get homeowners balance. I mean, you still sometimes need some special things that don't fit in, and you need some naming on things, sometimes. But if anybody longs for those days,
No, I agree with you. I think having that way of almost becomes a little bit of semantic way of understanding what the API structure is, right? Because you almost, as you mentioned, you can infer how things should be structured and set up. So it makes it easier on not that means we shouldn't have, something, I guess we'll talk about, with some of the comments in there around documentation or things that might support for documentation so you can understand what that contract is. But I think having it be done in a way that's organized, I think makes sense. And you may not, the other thing too is, I don't know, when I always think about these kind of things, sometimes I just want to get something written. I want to get something started, and I may come back later on and readjust my structure a little bit. And I oftentimes, thinking about, well, is this the right way I should structure it, or should I, think about this more of do I need another layer in here beside homeowners or something along those lines? And having that prevent you from just getting started. And sometimes it's just get in there and just start coding.
Right. So what's good about this is that I'm glad you stopped me, Andy. And the reason why is because, see, I've thought about this for quite a while. And so I know that unfortunately it's as hard as I try, it's very difficult for me to start with the blank slate, right? Because I've already started to think about what endpoints might look like and what I might be trying to do and what am I trying to accomplish. So, I've realized that, for example, like if I was just to throw out requirements, okay, I've realized over time that there is a method to, I'll pick on the electric company's madness, when I get or any of your utility bills, typically, when I get a bill from them and the first line says previous balance. And I understand that that's a level set. It's level setting that I can, if I want to see the full ledger of everything that's ever happened, I just got to keep all my bills and I can chain the previous balance and see, yes, that is what the last bill ended with. And then they'll put something on the ledger that says like, yeah, I paid on a date. Oh, and then we assessed your new fee for electricity on this date. And I decided, yeah, I actually need to follow that model because things happen over the last several years that have made me realize, for example, the new assessment where I basically tell somebody, hey, you didn't pay last quarter, so now you basically owe for 2 quarters. It crosses in the mail with the check that's a little behind for the previous quarter, and then the next week I get the check for the current quarter. So now I've gotten 2 payments, and I can't just send my next bill. Can't just say yeah, you're caught up now. It needs to be previous balance 100. I know we crossed in the mail, but that's what it said. And then here's the item on the ledger for received check 1, received check 2. I realized that I could no longer expect that I might just receive 1 check every quarter from every resident. I will receive any number of checks from 0 on up for a variety of reasons, including mistakes that homeowners make, like accidentally using their bank bill pay to send me the water bill balance. And they're like, oops, I messed up when I was doing the bills. And so, and I'll write them and I'll say, yeah, I feel like that was an odd amount. Like, what happened there? And they're like, that's okay. Just credit it. So now I gotta be able to deal with that. For those of you fans of event sourcing, I'm dealing with a ledger. I have 34 ledgers is what I really have. And at any time, I should be able to reconcile them just by adding them up. I can go back to the beginning of time, my beginning of time, apply each of the events, whether those are the assessments or the payments. And, a homeowner's check might bounce.
You sound like
that's a different
Black
show.
Widow, right? She doesn't want to have red in her ledger, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a different show, right? That's the event sourcing show. But
so, all right, so where are we now? So we think that we would have this thing called homeowners, right?
Well,
should we talk about?
I actually haven't felt that way, but maybe, and the reason why is because when a homeowner moves, the balance stays with the residents. Oh. So let's say this isn't supposed to happen, but sometimes it does. At closing, title companies really like it for the residents to have a zero balance on the HOA assessments. I mean, that makes title companies very, very secure about the transaction, right?
Okay. Well, we don't need to get too specific on homeowner stuff, like, you know, but that's your criteria, so that's good.
Yeah. But that's where I realized that if you moved out and we're still $100 behind, I can't come after you for it. I have to stick with the residents. Right?
Okay. The residence is the model that we're concerned with, right?
Yeah.
So let's just play along with that. So what kind of things would you do to a resident? You would add a resident, you would remove a resident, you would change a residence, right? Those are the standard, like, you know, CRUD actions, right? And I think I saw someone, maybe it was Meg earlier, mentioning CRUD in the
so here's something, right? The address, that never changes. That's going to be that forever. It's 2400 for a specific resource.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So for the end of time, should I be able to get on that and get something that tells me about that residence? As far as
I'm saying 2400 is like 2400 Main Street.
Yeah, it's the house number.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you should be able to do that, right? That's a type of thing I would expect to see.
This does change. Homeowners change. I guess what I'm kind of hoping to do in this exercise is play a little bit of design. Hopefully it's interesting to everyone. And I kind of wanted Andy and Rich to jump in because I've thought about the problem too much. So I'm letting them.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's cool. I think it is good to do something like this. Now, I don't want to go too deep into.
We don't have to do too many of them. No, we don't. We can just do a couple and then move on. Yeah.
You've got these concepts. And so the concept applies to anyone else who's building an API. They're going to have some sort of object model that people want to work with, right? Now, I find it gets tricky when you have something that crosses models. You know, that's, I think, where things get complicated. Like, sure, we've established that on a residence, you could do a get. But
what does it mean?
Maybe
what
it
do I
makes
get
sense
back?
if you have,
yeah.
What's that?
I don't know what I get back yet. I'm not sure.
Oh, well, sure.
I mean, is that a ton of stuff or should I keep it simple? Or do you need more? Like, go ahead, keep going.
Well, no, I mean, what you're saying is, what about the old, like, how often did we have these methods in our code that would be like, get complete address, get complete residence, get partial residence. And I always hated those words because they never really told you, they weren't clear enough. What does a partial residence mean? You know, like what does it mean to get half of that thing? You know, if you don't want all the fields. But I think generally speaking, if you were doing a get, like on a straightforward API, I would expect pretty much every field in that residence object to come back.
Okay.
I would think, and I'm curious to know what other people would say. Would you expect that? If a residence has, if there's 100 columns in the database, or whatever, I shouldn't say the database because who knows where this is being stored. But if there's 100 attributes on a residence, I would think get is giving me all of them. Now there may be some reason that if this is a public API, maybe some values are shielded from the public, and I understand like some of that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But in the context of your API and your customer, whoever the customer is, the consumer of this API would get like everything.
Yeah, and we've gotten some great ideas, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of interesting stuff that has been mentioned in the chat here. Like, for example, do I get the full state or maybe some IDs or links to get additional calls, right?
Yeah.
And then like Meg is saying here, residents could have like attributes like address and homeowners. Like, yeah, because I've thought, do I need a list? Do I need a list of all the, maybe not all, but so.
Well, hang on. What
do we want to drill into? Go ahead.
You skim by the first one kind of quickly. It might be worth talking a little bit about this. What Mike says about IDs or data coming back, right? So I guess it's kind of common in APIs. So you have this example of residence / 2400, Main Street or something. I like to put a word on there because it's hard to know that represents an address, right? So, whatever the parameter is, I think it could be more clear. Yeah.
Okay, so I see what you're saying is
is 2400 the ID or is it the address?
So and again, this is probably because it's too close to my problem, is that for me this identifies this is good enough for me. I get what you're saying about how perhaps your HOA is on more than one street, right?
Well, yeah. I'm also genericizing it to not necessarily be about a homeowners association, but all right. So let me go back to the point I was making. Is that I think what Mike was saying, I think also is that if you have something that is meant to query information, like if I wanted to say, give me all the residences, right? Would that method give me a list of IDs for each of those residents? Or would it actually give me all of the data for all of the residences, right? And so there's a big difference, right? Does it give me the ID so that I can do another lookup, right? Because get, usually you have more than one get method. You usually have a get that takes a parameter, like a single, residence / 2400 as a get, right? And there might be another one with a residence that maybe has like a query string. At least this is my thing, right? Residence ? North side of the block or whatever it is, like whatever kind of attribute we want to use to query those subset of residences, right? And if I asked for all of the residences on the north side of the block or whatever, then what would it give me? Would it give me the name of the house and the address of the house and the size of the house? Or would it just give me, on the right side of the street, north side, you have number 3, number 5, number 7, and number 9, and then I can requery to get further information, right? And I think this is a common, there are two different strategies that you often see with APIs.
Okay. So, one of the things you have to design, right, is like this base level call. What does it return? And we were getting here some responses like, hey, do you need to call more after that? And then, for example, like, I think, do you have to do something like Meg is saying here is decide that other things maybe belong? So, for example, I'm going to receive payments, which maybe could be genericized to events, but I'm not sure that I want to do the developer thing of like, let me find the most abstract way to think of this, you can certainly make a payment I can certainly receive a payment from a residence, but is it possible that should be its own endpoint too? Should you also be able to maybe follow this down 2 tracks where I say for residents 2400 I want its payments, but maybe I also want all the payments made in the third quarter? Is that this is pseudo here, so apologize if I'm being dumb about this, but
listen, one of the things that I think we haven't touched upon here,
okay,
is well, because the answer is always it depends, right?
I know.
And
I was waiting for it depends.
But what does it depend upon? Well, we haven't mentioned the customer, the client, the consumer, right? And often, we could think about this from a very generic, like, how should this work? But we really want to think about it, I think, from the perspective of the person who's going to be consuming this. What will make sense to them, right? What are their use cases? And I do think it's important to bring it back and say, well, what do they want, right?
Okay.
Do you have a requirement that says, I would like to get all the payments for the third quarter? And do I have a requirement to get all the payments for a particular residence? And I think that it's okay. I think, I could see having both of those methods that you're putting there, though. I really do.
Here's what I like about you asking that question, Andy, is you are saying we're sussing out requirements. And so I want to go back to something Rich said. Rich, when you said sometimes it's nice to just feel things out, even in code.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like sometimes we get criticized for that. Like, let's not just jump right into code. Let's really think about the design. But maybe, Rich, is it true that little play session might help, especially our developer brains, say, oh, okay, I kind of get what I should go back and ask deeper questions about?
I think it does. I think, I don't know, if you write code often, I think you get wired to kind of work that way in some senses. And I think it also depends on what kind of this is, and my mindset around this is it's your little app that you're writing for your homeowner's management of payments, right? If this was our big enterprise application that's going to be doing, a different bit of service, yeah, we'd probably have a little more discussion of design, because probably what we're going to be writing API wise is going to be much larger than just a couple of things that we have here. So I think I think there's a time and a place where it might be okay to just jump in, start mocking things up.
Yeah, I do like to mock things up and see how it plays out, right? Like, I wish I was good enough to write like all this stuff out like in advance and not write any code. I feel like that's a skill, and I sort of need to get my hands dirty a little bit. I mean, the audience is really jumping in here too. Meg's got.
Yeah, I know, and I feel kind of bad that we missed out on this.
It's really hard to keep track of all this. I mean, I love the fact that people, I always wonder how people do this. Like, we've got a nice number of people on the show tonight, and if there was like 500 people all typing comments, though, how do people deal with that? Like, fame must be complicated,
Yeah.
What we need to figure out for this year is how do we somehow pluck a person into the conversation and have them just participate, because they obviously have a lot of great ideas and a lot of thoughts.
Right. Yeah. Right.
So if anybody knows how to do that, that's watching, we want to be able to take you guys and bring you and say, hey, join a call. Let's get you on the show right now.
I think that's what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to get, let me see if we can bring this up real quick. At some point, we're going to have Meg on as a guest. Get her out of the chat.
Meg should be on every week, Well,
there's yeah.
So I want to respond to a couple of things that were said. Like, for example, the data's in Excel, Access in Notepad. It is absolutely true. Whoops, I messed that up there.
That might have been me. I was clearing something out. Sorry.
It's okay. Don't worry about it. It is absolutely true that I solved this problem with Excel for now, and it's worked pretty well, but it's not perfect. And I actually do think, I know this might sound like developer-y, but I do think I could use this. So to answer, I like how you sussed out when I was sort of leading this way, is should we go back and find out if I need this? if I need to be able to say, well, show me all the the payments for third quarter 2020. And my thinking has been, as I've considered this, is no, it really turns out that I don't have a good use for that. What I do have a use for is being able to examine any residence when I want to. And this is kind of how the Excel works, is I can examine a residence and kind of see where are they at. And originally I made silly mistakes like have a cell for their fourth quarter payment. And then the first time I got to multiple payments, I went, oh, this isn't going to work. So I had to think about how to rearrange it so that I was basically filling one table out with events, and then those would get, you go down the ledger, and then I could look at another sheet that's bringing it all together and saying like, here's the balance. Like that's what's really important. So no, it turns out I don't need this, and I'm glad we pulled that because I didn't want to write that. I was hoping we'd discover it. And but yes, I do need, and I keep using the word events because unfortunately I've gone far enough down the path that I've realized there's many types of things that happen. There's a payment, but there's also a bounce check. So the payment happens and I need to record that, but then I need to show that it was another event to say that, look, the money got taken away. That's the bounce check. Oh, and by the way, the association was charged a fee and we passed that along. So there's another event. And it made me realize that, it's not just send a bill, get a check, send a bill, get a check. It's a ledger.
Yeah, truly is.
And it took me some time to get there. So, anything else? I'm not intending to get too far into this, but I'm hoping we might have thought about, yes, we talked a little bit. This was good to say like, well, why not just do this?
On the topic of what do we return from a method, like a get, do we return an actual residence or the ID of a residence? Another pattern I see, by the way, is to return the URL of the address of the residence, meaning the URL is the URL of the REST API that gives you more detail of the next of the thing you want, right?
Yeah, and I feel like I didn't even ask you to move this direction, but you might have. Because we can look at the example, right? Where one way is you could get an account resource, but you could also get links for what to do next. Is that what you're talking about?
No, but that's actually really cool. I like that. That's kind of neat.
So this is known as HATOAS, which was mentioned earlier, and I did not forget it. It's just that Contrived EX said it, and it just was a ways back, and I caught it, and I was like, yeah, let's make sure we come back to this. Certainly, we can see that, like, hey, I think it can be taken too far. So if you continue in the Fielding dissertation, he says, why not keep using Hypermedia as the engine of application state? What a long-winded thing for saying, this is the way I think of it. When I tell you to go look up a score of a football game for a team and you go to ESPN.com, do you remember that you would go to ESPN.com/something/something/something/the team name? You don't. ESPN.com provides you an interface, some links that you navigate. You don't have to know them all. And that's what Hypermedia is. That's what hypertext was for. That was why we built the web. Well, the proposal is that continue letting the web be the web. You make your first call, and when you make your first call, the client should be given everything it needs to make future calls. And this is just one example, right?
Yeah.
And that's like some of the, that's some of the, I don't know, I think the early examples of ASP.NET MVC, right? Where you would get back in your results for the music store app, it would be the URL that would essentially, as part of your JSON results, it would be the URL that would take you to that item that you were looking at. So is that kind of what we're saying here? So basically, as I get my results back, I can have a very easy way to get into the UI that a way to click to see where that more detail is.
I think, yeah. In fact, it kind of says it better here where it says a REST client enters a REST application through a simple fixed URL. future actions the client may take are discovered within resource representations. The idea being that if you're not following the dissertation, then you need a bunch of documentation from me to tell you after you call account what to do next.
Gotcha. Okay.
And I am going to do the dissertation no justice whatsoever, because if you start asking me questions like, well, wait, how does your client know what to do with this? And that seems like a lot of links. And can that possibly work? I'm the wrong person to ask. But
yeah, and those methods there, this is not a criticism of them, but they're not following what I think would be like that RESTful model, right? In other words, deposit is not just post to accounts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? There's another action, there's another verb happening there, and that's probably because it's necessary. Because you could get into other complex. There's other ways to do it. You could say, I'm going to do a put to an account, and that put in that thing, I will describe the action you want to take. I want to make this a withdrawal. I want to transfer, because put, which is like I want to alter my account, could mean a whole bunch of different things. It could also mean I want to alter the account, meaning like the address of the account holder, right? So I think it's kind of cool to have these other methods, but does that move us from REST is what I'm wondering. And is that bad or good?
Oh, well, so technically, if you actually do read the dissertation, HADOAS is part of the REST architecture. And
right.
I think it's fair to say that Roy himself has criticized APIs that maybe kind of looked at his dissertation and said, oh, I like a couple of those things. But his feeling and I hate speaking for him, but wouldn't it be wonderful if he were here to explain it for me? But that the idea is that you are constrained. You are, it says here, a web service needs to meet certain constraints, right? You're not out there saying, if you don't follow what the web is, which is basically a document provides links for you to go to the next thing. When I go to ESPN.com, I don't have to know how to get to the Lakers homepage, at least through the URL. Hypermedia is going to get me there. I'm going to go ESPN.com, NBA, Lakers, right?
Yeah.
But REST, I should say REST, our APIs don't often work that way. There's often a doc site, and you go to the doc site and you say, okay, well, I got to make this call, and then I'm going to take the information out of that, and then I'm going to make this call, and then I'm going to take and every single endpoint is painstakingly documented about here's what you should send, here's what you can query, how you can use the query string to ask for some stuff. And I think what maybe what ContriveDX was kind of trying to say is that in the long run, I don't necessarily know that Roy proved to be like, yes, if we all did this, it would be such a wonderful world. Well, maybe that's not true, because we have been very successful kind of being kind of restful, right?
Yeah.
We follow some of what he said, but maybe not everything to the thesis,
Yeah, it's funny, we don't learn a lot of time. Well, maybe I'm overstating that, but how many times have you had something that you really like, a pattern, right? It could be Agile, for example, or Scrum, like an implementation like that. Getting out of programming altogether, but going to something like that, and people, will bash it, and it's like, well, why do you think it doesn't work? And you're like, well, we took a few parts of it at work, and it totally failed. We did part of it, and it didn't even work. And it's like, but that's because you didn't really follow the whole thing, right? And so here we are. I'm an example of this, like sort of following REST, but not fully understanding it, and maybe not embracing it as the way that this guy, intended it to be. And then if I find it has shortcomings, well, maybe that's because I'm doing it wrong.
Yeah, but I am not necessarily, for example, look at all this stuff that we could go into. Models have been developed to classify REST APIs according to their adherence to the various principles, such as the Richardson maturity model, where he basically says, look, level 0 is what we talked about earlier, feels very RPC-like, oh, the URI is booking service, the URI is newsfeed service. And then later you say, oh, I've decided that these things are actually resources, like I did with residents and with payments. I realized that they're resources. And then later you say, now hold on a second, what if I start using the verbs? Because here in this case, I can still think of a booking destination as a resource, but it doesn't mean I'm using what we would in this conversation thought of was the right verb. The API can still work, but at level 2, you're quote unquote using the more correct verbs. And then level 3 is Hypermedia as the engine of application state, where after getting a room, I get, an href that says here the reservation is, I don't know. It's room 102. That's what you want to look in. And so there's a lot I don't want to get into the academic side too much. I feel like, I don't know that was, but if you want to read more about the Richardson maturity model, there it is, which classifies web APIs based on their adherence to, his 4 levels. It's kind of like saying how far did you go along the dissertation, right?
Yeah. So. And listen, to be fair, what is this thing that you're building? You're building this, for the homeowners association, not for academia, not for big, business, right? And so there's a part where, like we talk about when we talk about, design principles, where we talk about different things, we always say don't be dogmatic. You have to be flexible, and you have to build. You want to get this thing done, right? And so you could argue that level of complication, while it might be awesome, is just entirely overkill for the particular thing you're building, right?
Yeah. Yep. Definitely. We heard some other things, and I want to bring up a talk that we're not gonna be able to. We're obviously not gonna sit here and watch it or whatever, but I think if you want to think more about REST, and I know this is a bit on the older side, but I think it's a goodie. Years ago, I saw this NDC talk called The Rest of REST, right? And here it is. And I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. And he talks about fielding. Here he is, talking about when given a name, a coordinated set of architectural constraints come style, whatever. That's not what's really important. Where I want to get to, he goes over the REST constraints, but what I want to get to is he says, so you start building your REST API, and you get to the place where you get back your heroes profiles. And then what happens when you've got somebody finally does a get on profiles and there's 25,000 superheroes. Whoops. And then you get a call the next day from your IT folks that say your stupid API is using all the bandwidth. Right? And so some of the things he talks about in this talk is how do you overcome the issue of, okay, so you started adhering to REST and you say, get back residences. That sounded pretty reasonable early on tonight. I only have 34. What if I had 34,000? Do I really want that get residences to return 100 megabytes of data? So this talk goes into solutions, some of which have been semi-standardized. I think it's cool to look at. It goes back a little bit to the GraphQL question that was brought up earlier.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I like this talk. The Rest of REST, you can see it a couple times. One of them was on NDC. He's done it at other places. I like it. I think it's a good mental reset to watch every now and then. So
yeah, listen, I think what we're getting at here, and I think this is a great topic for a show, right? And I think we can talk about this, but I think what you're really saying here is in a kind of an hour, we're just not going to become an expert in this, right? Like this is a big, complicated space that we're trying to operate in. And there are countless situations that could come up. And so, there's no way we could get to all of them, right? And so this is a big space. And if we want to do it well, we need to put the time in and we need to do the research. We need to talk about it. We need to watch video. You know, like so often I get questions. People say, well, how do I become an expert in API? You know, I need to know everything. Okay, great. And, and I'm making this up a little bit here as an example, but people will say, like, I need to get really good at this API thing. I said, why? Well, my project starts in 2 weeks. Well, maybe you can't get really good at it in 2 weeks. It's a complicated space. So I think there's a lot to. I mean, I think there's so many questions that come up. I mean, this is a good one, right? That's in the video right here. I think another one has to do with, how do you, well, I guess this plays upon that. How do you query that data so you get you get the values out of it? How do you build a query? And you mentioned GraphQL and some of those things. I also think it gets complicated when you want to update the data. And so you may have let's say, this residence, right? And I want to update a residence. So how do I update that residence that might have 5 values? Well, that's not too bad. What if that residence has, 100, 200 attributes, right? How do I say which one of those I want to update? Are we allowed to do that? Am I allowed to update part of it, or do I have to update the whole thing? I think these are also sort of complications. And I guess that also brings me back to those other methods, which I'm really I was kind of interested in that part where you were showing with the slash and the method that came after it. Like it was like a homeowners or, sort of residence 2400 / make payment, or something like that, which was in that other website you were showing,
Oh, sorry. When we were talking about the HATOAS stuff.
Yeah, that stuff is interesting because, I've often found it constraining to try to figure out how do I work with get, post, put, delete. And some of the methods, some of the things like that would not be clear, right? And so I really like this model. In other words, I'm not constrained to account /100 and a put or a post or a delete, because what's a transfer? A transfer is none of those things, right? An account is more than just the balance within the account. An account has, a post to an account might actually be, I want to change the name on the account, right? Is that,
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and then look at how one thing we didn't talk about is that in this particular example, which may be incomplete and we probably aren't doing justice to, is that because the account has money, you can deposit, withdraw, transfer, and close. Like these are the different actions you're allowed to take. But then in the next example, the account's overdrawn. You aren't given all the choices you were given previously. You cannot close this account. You cannot transfer to it or from it, I suppose. You can't withdraw from it. Interesting that the API itself is kind of transferring that state. Doesn't maybe only the name of the idea, right? So that the client just says, well, here's the action available to you, deposit. The others aren't. I don't even have to have logic as to why. Not important to me. The server has transferred that state to me.
Right.
I hope I'm saying that right. And somebody who really knows REST might say, oh my gosh, you just screwed everybody up on REST. But there's a lot that was talked about in the chat. Like, for example, can you provide, if you make a call that if you make 20 calls that take 1 second each, but you render along the way, then the user knows things are happening. So certainly there's a UX component of can you make the user feel like progress is being made, and I don't mean like the Windows progress bar where 98% might be 50% of the way there. I mean, so I mean, we've gotten a lot of good conversation. We didn't really get to go into GraphQL, which as you watch the rest of REST presentation, and he goes into some standards that are emerging. Hey, look at what's live. Look at that. We could watch this show live right now.
Wow, that's cool. It's an endless loop there.
He goes into some standards that were emerging for for this that I'm sure a GraphQL fan would say, why don't you just use GraphQL? I don't think any of us we particularly want to switch that topic, because GraphQL is a great topic that we should have someone on to talk to us about. But like they say, when your REST query issues include things like overfetching or requiring multiple network requests, then take a look at GraphQL, which my understanding, which may be totally wrong, is the reason it was created is I think Facebook needed a way to not have to make 400,000 API calls to build your wall, right? To build your timeline. They needed a more concise way. And that's really about all I can say about it. I'm not going to pretend that I can talk GraphQL more intelligently than that.
Do we want to go back to your example, and talk about building that out more? But before we do, maybe I can jump in here with this.
Yep.
This is a good place to have a little promotional commercial here, right? And talk about, if you're here and you're enjoying this show, we hope you'll come back Wednesday nights in the East Coast, East US, 8:30 p.m. on Wednesday nights, which is was at UTC -5, and we hope you'll come back and join us. So bookmark us, subscribe to us, favorite us, whatever mechanism it is that will help you get there. We would love for you to subscribe to us on YouTube and follow us on Twitch, and you can also follow us on Twitter at the Dev Talk Show. And you could even join our Meetup, which we promote the talks that are coming out in Meetup. There's a whole bunch of ways you can follow us, but we hope that you will do so and be a part of this conversation and help us, make these shows great. Anything else we need to add on that topic?
No, like you said, video, YouTube, Dev Talk Show, right? The Dev Talk Show. There is a lot that we didn't even talk about.
Yeah, we're not done. I don't think. I wasn't meaning to say we were done.
Well, I was gonna say, like, I'm almost afraid to go into other topics like versioning or something, because think about how long that could take, right?
Yeah. I didn't realize we've been at this a while now.
Yeah. So we might have to leave that. I don't know that it wouldn't be a bad idea. I know this is huge. Like, people take courses on this, and mainly I kind of wanted to see, like, how would it feel to go through trying to design some basic stuff. We didn't even get very far, but that's okay.
We didn't get very far. I didn't feel,
Do you think we would, though? I mean, we got to jump off and talk about some things.
So maybe what we should do is note, and we could go back and watch the show, or we could right here in Notepad put down some topics, but like, what are these things that we want to talk about also, like GraphQL? There was a lot of other comments in here. Like, were there other things we want to capture now?
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, there's a conversation about versioning APIs, and I would just ask you, like, you've had to deal with that, right? So yes. I feel like there's a show just on versioning APIs, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I guess it could be a show, sure. Yeah. It could certainly be part of a show.
Meg talked a lot about, different languages and the way they develop things. And it would be interesting, I think, to take a look at how different languages might expose this. What do they have in common? Because
I think we were trying to stay like language agnostic, right? And talk about the theory behind this. There's also the API gateway stuff that Mike Shea is mentioning there. I think a while back we talked about using Azure for APIs for what's that called, Rich?
API management.
API management, yeah, simply named API management. And there are other alternatives to that, which may be, I'm sure, not nearly as good, Rich, but they might be interesting. And that's a whole conversation that could be had, right?
Some way of laying a facade over top of your APIs, right?
Yeah.
Whatever that might be.
Yeah. There's API security is a topic.
Oh gosh, we didn't even talk, because believe me, where I go with this is a place where a homeowner could look at their history, but now security comes in. As long as I'm the only person consuming it and I keep it in my own machine, then it might as well stay in Excel, right?
Yeah,
But
that's what I was just gonna say. Yeah.
yeah, but if I do consider it as a way for, because where we're going with this is many homeowners have asked, like, what would you think about just sending me the bill in email? And I go, yeah. See, there's some infrastructure to build there because I don't want to do this onesie twosie. I don't want to be like, okay, let me print them out using my current process and then let me figure out that these. No, it's got to be automated or it just consumes me. So I don't want that. So, and I'm not trying to bring that problem here. I'm just saying, like, this is why I said to myself, maybe I could use a bit some kind of API because it could solve a lot of interesting problems. But
well, so here's something we haven't mentioned, right? I think, is MVP, the concept of MVP, or minimum viable product, which is to say, why don't you, this API could be big, right? There could be a lot of features, but would it help you if there were one or two features in there to help you get started, right?
Yep.
And build it incrementally?
Yep.
Of course, you would need the data to be stored somewhere, and well, quite frankly, you could query the Excel. You could upload that Excel CSV into tables, into blob storage or something like that, and simply query that.
Technically.
And that's probably, like, if you think about it from an iterative perspective, there's nothing wrong with that when there's only, sorry, how many addresses did you say there are?
34.
Right.
It's not
34
huge.
addresses.
Yeah.
So you could have it stored in JSON in your solution. I mean, like, honestly, like, it wouldn't be very updatable that way, right? But so start with something simple, like, okay, because then you add, you have data access, you have all these things to think about. So what would be the simplest way to get the data out there so you could simply do one or two methods on that data, right?
Yep.
Because quite frankly, you can build an application out of this thing using something like I'm using the term application really loosely here. But if you could get the data up there and start to build out the API, you don't need a UI when there are other tools out there, including VS Code, where you can just have a file that has a bunch of REST endpoints in the file, right? I forget what that's called. Maybe you guys remember the name of this, where you could just fire off these requests and it just becomes easy for you to use. You don't even have a UI on it, but you have all these REST calls, sort of saved, and they're just like bookmarks essentially, right?
Mm-hmm.
In a page. Do you remember what that's called?
No, unfortunately, I don't. But
No.
certainly, I don't know, unfortunately.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, I thought you were heading towards Swagger / OpenAPI,
Well,
but you weren't.
Swagger would be helpful. No, in VS Code, if you name a file something, I forget what it's called. Yeah, Postman can be your UI. I agree with you. But you can also, in VS Code, you can put a whole bunch of, essentially their URLs, right? A whole bunch of
So
calls
Ancient
that are
Coder
REST
saying, is it
What's
Ancient
that?
Coder saying a file with a REST extension? Is that real?
Maybe it's something like that.
I
Maybe
believe
it's
you.
just .rest. Maybe it's just .rest. My point is, don't get consumed by building the application around this, the whole UI, but start building out this, just the API and not the UI. And it would still be helpful to you, I think.
Yeah. No, I know. But so yeah. Big topic, huh? But hopefully it was good. Hopefully it was good for getting back together and getting back on track, right? So here we are, Code Camp this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about it earlier in the show, but definitely the Philly.net group is hosting Code Camp, and you do need to head over to the Meetup and make sure that you sign up and get on because they have to add you to the Teams tenant. But
it's not I think what you're saying is it's not.
There isn't a Twitch channel.
Remember, it's not so simple as just going to the YouTube channel or something like that to see it. You do need to register in advance to get access.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think I just saw what you were saying, Ancient Coder. There's a client, an extension called REST Client, which I I wasn't aware of. So that would be interesting to look at. But other than that, hey, what do you guys think? We'll call it a night there.
Yeah. So thanks to everybody for. I mean, there was a lot of conversation going on here tonight.
Yeah. Yeah, there was. And appreciate everybody joining us, and a ton of great conversation. I wish we could have gotten to more of it. And it certainly is inspiring to think about how we can get other voices, directly involved during the show. So we will be thinking about that for sure. But hey, we'll be back. I think there's no reason we won't be back on January 20th. So whether you are watching live right now on Twitch and YouTube, and thanks to everybody who did, or if you join us in the future from, by watching on YouTube at the archive at youtube.com/The Dev Talk Show. All right. Got some thanks from folks over on YouTube and Twitch. And thanks for joining us both places. We'll see you next time. Make sure you check out the meetup for the topic, and we'll probably post the topic on Twitter. I think we should be able to get that out a little bit later. Other than that, anything else?
No, it's a good show. Good to be back.
All right. All right. So that'll do it. We'll see you next time. We'll see you on the 20th at 8:30 U.S. Eastern. For my co-hosts Rich Ross and Andy Schwam, I am Chris Gomez, and we will see you next time on the Dev Talk Show.